Did Burt have a hidden reason for inviting Irving to dinner? Is Milchick about to have a breakdown? Why did Ben Stiller call Mark and Helena's meeting the heat scene? We'll be answering these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This video will look at episode 6 of season 2 of Severance, called Attila. I'll recap everything that happened in the episode, then do a deep in-depth review of the major storylines, pick my favourite line, cover any trivia, and look ahead to the upcoming episodes. Let's jump straight into the recap. The episode opens with Mark telling Dr. Rugabi about the vision he had at the end of the last episode. Rugabi seems pleased with his progress with reintegration, even though Mark is rattled by the experience, particularly the fact that Gemma didn't recognise him. Rugabi tells Mark that the Gemma he knew is still in there, but I think she'd tell Mark anything to make him continue with the procedure. We then jump into the kitchenette at the MDR department, where Dylan is telling the other two about the note Irving left with the directions to the lift to the testing floor. It's still hidden behind the poster because Dylan doesn't want to get into trouble. He doesn't tell the other two why he's keeping his nose clean, but it's clearly because he wants to keep seeing his wife in the visitation centre. Mark then has some weird visualisations, where he quickly flips between the innie and outie worlds. The reintegration process is clearly starting to take hold. After the credits, we see Milchick meet with Miss Wong. He tells her that many valid concerns were raised at his performance review, and he's looking forward to addressing them. Milchick then basically warns her not to snitch on him to the senior management, after she was obviously the one that blabbed about his erratic paper clipping and an overabundance of elongated verbiage. But we see signs of Milchick's devotion to needlessly complex word choices when he suggests Miss Wang should eradicate childish folly from her essence. After giving out his warning, Milchick tells Miss Wang that she'll be covering the 7th floor while he's busy today, which leads to an interesting interaction where Milchick won't let her sit at his desk. She's clearly furious about being denied this extra bit of power, and now has another reason to hate Milchick. We then see Mark and Helly talking in the toilets. Mark confesses to Helly that he shared vessels with Helena on the Ortbo, which is a phrasing that Milchick would be proud of. Helly takes this news about as you would expect her to, shocked, upset and feeling betrayed, while also rapidly thinking about the motives behind the move by her outie. Helly goes for a walk on her own to clear her head, and Mark goes back to refining. Neither seems overly happy at this point. We then find out why Milchick needed the day to himself. He's spending the time drilling himself on correct paperclip placement. He's clearly taken on board the feedback he's received and wants to improve. It seemed like he may go the other way, but at least on the surface, he currently seems fully committed to the company. We then see another meeting between Dylan and Gretchen. They're a lot more natural together now they've got used to each other and the strange setup of the visitation centre. They get on very well, and the time together ends with a passionate kiss. Helly talks to Mark about how she feels about him sharing vessels with a different version of her. She's not mad at him, just with her outie self for stealing the experience from her. Mark, being a gentleman, offers to describe the experience so she knows what she missed out on. Helly has a better idea though. She wants to experience the real thing with Mark. Mark jumps at the chance, so they go off to the office with the plastic sheets and they make them into a tent. Maybe for privacy, or maybe because innie Mark can only perform in a tent situation. It's not clear. They manage to work out where everything goes, and it seems to be an enjoyable one-on-one team bonding session for them both. Milchick has clipped together his huge pile of papers, so moves on to his next improvement point, which is his use of big words. He stares at himself in the mirror and repeats one of the lines he said to Miss Wong, and repeatedly reworks it until its message is boiled down to the words grow up, and then just grow. On the way back to the MDR department, Mark and Helly exchange kisses, and they notice Mark's nose is bleeding. Miss Wong treats him, and Mark lies about what he was doing when he got the nosebleed, and about having hallucinations. And Mark has another hallucination, this time flipping between Miss Wong's office and his basement in the outie world. It's only fleeting, but both Marks seem to be becoming unravelled from time and space. It ends quickly, and we switch back to Rugabi treating Mark. They're still disagreeing with each other about the treatment, but they've swapped sides with each other in this episode. Now it's Rugabi who's the one that wants to speed things up, but Mark wants to take things slowly. Rugabi's idea is to do a bit of amateur brain surgery in the dusty basement. Mark rips off his wires and refuses her offer to slice open his head. Irving goes to dinner with Burt and Fields. It's a bit weird, but Fields seems like a nice guy. As they eat, we see Burt slagging off the Whole Mind Collective, and Irving keeping quiet about it. This puts to bed a few theories that I've seen that both Burt and Irving are working for this group. We then hear that Burt's reason for becoming severed was because of his and Fields' interpretation of Christianity. Burt has done some bad things in his past, which we don't get the details of, but both he and Fields believe that his outie has no chance of getting into heaven. Therefore, they think becoming severed gives him a chance of getting his innie into heaven. While this dinner is going on, we see Drummond turn up at Irving's house and start snooping around. He looks over the hidden paperwork we saw last season in Irving's trunk. He's particularly interested in the list of severed employees that Irving has got hold of. Then we see another glimpse of Outie Dylan, and Gretchen is trying to talk him out of buying a car they can't afford. She also lies to Outie Dylan about her meeting earlier with innie Dylan. She says it was cancelled, which I suppose is easier conversation than confessing that she snogged another version of him. We then see Mark, ravenous from the reintegration process, demolishing some Chinese food. While he's eating, Helena Egan turns up and acts like it's a big coincidence. Their conversation is stilted and awkward. Outie Mark doesn't know that Helena has slept with his innie, but he still doesn't trust her. Helena tells Mark that she's the head of the company, but this is clearly not true because she takes orders from both Natalie and Mr. Drummond. My guess is that she's puffing up her responsibility to try and impress Mark, which is a bit misguided as he hates her company. Altogether, the interaction is very strange. It's a bit flirty but also intimidating at the same time. Helena seems to be a bit all over the place. She says Mark's wife is called Hannah rather than Gemma, which I think she does on purpose to make it sound like she's not intimately familiar with Mark. The conversation is cut short when Mark has a coughing fit, providing another example of his reintegration sickness. And they exchange a strange moment as they leave. Maybe Mark experiences some of his inner's feelings for Helena and it looks like they might kiss. The moment passes though, and Mark drives off looking scared. Back at the dinner party, it looks like Fields has made a mistake when he says Burt was severed 20 years ago, when the procedure's only been around for 12. Burt gives Fields a not very subtle, slow down your drinking gesture. I suspect this is because he said something he shouldn't, rather than he's made a mistake with his timings. Then Fields gulps down his drink in defiance of Burt. The wine seems to embolden Fields, and he starts speculating about what Burt and Irving did when they were together on the severed floor. He's been talking to his pastor about it, and has decided that Innie deserve love and doesn't resent their relationship. Though his fixation on the physical aspect strikes me that he's not completely okay with the whole situation. Mark rushes back into his house and tells Ragabi he's willing to push on with a more aggressive approach to reintegration. Most people would consider brain surgery not the kind of thing you can just blunder in and have a go at in a mucky basement, with bits and bobs you have with you. But Mark and Ragabi are clearly not bothered by any of this. Ragabi slices into the skin over a huge hole in the back of Mark's skull, and uses an unpleasantly long needle to go into his brain. She squirts a liquid around the severance chip, which is meant to speed up the reintegration process. She uses some surgical tape to cover up the gaping wound, and pretty soon the effect of the surgery takes hold. He almost immediately has a flashback to sleeping with Helena earlier in the day. Against Ragabi's medical advice, Mark jumps up to answer the door. It's his sister Devon, who has come to check in on him. Mark is evasive when she asks him what he's been doing. He looks really sick in this scene and is struggling with stabbing head pains and can't even pick up a glass despite repeated attempts. Mark then faints and hits his head hard on the floor, prompting Ragabi to rush out from the basement. Burt sees Irving to the door, and Irving says that they should do it again sometime. Burt asks if Fields should be involved next time, and Irving initially says yes, but then reads the implication behind what Burt was saying, and says maybe it could just be the two of them. Perhaps this is a glimpse at the bad behaviour they spoke about earlier from Burt, though I think there's probably more to it, as the last image of the episode is Burt watching Irving leave with a malevolent look on his face. Now we've recapped the episode, let's dig a bit deeper. I thought this was another excellent episode. It feels like the pace of the story is picked up and we're really starting to go somewhere. It's still hard to know exactly where that is, but I'm grateful that things are moving fast and we're not going to have to wait for the storylines to progress. The biggest event in this episode involved Mark, Helly and Helena, after Milchick showed an intention to blackmail Mark over his carrying on in the tent in the Ortbow with Helena. I think it was smart of Mark to tell Helly himself. Now Milchick has lost that ammunition to use against him, and it ended up with Mark getting more tent time. While things were very affectionate between Helly and Innie Mark, the encounter at the Chinese restaurant with Helena and Outie Mark played out differently. It was weird and awkward how Helena was straddling a line between flirting with Mark and being vaguely threatening. My impression is that she has a lonely and odd existence that has meant stealing a relationship from her Innie developed into a good option for her. I'm not exactly sure what Helena was doing following Mark and starting this interaction. Maybe she was on official company business, but it felt more like she was operating under her own steam. Maybe out of hope that there will be a romantic spark between her and Outie Mark based on the ways Innie feels about her Innie. It didn't work though, and the fear this interaction created in Mark was the final push he needed to accelerate his reintegration. While this procedure wasn't a raging success, given he ended the episode unconscious on the floor, it should mean that there's more crossover now between Innie and Outie Marks, which should be fun to watch. I'm also interested in seeing how Devon and Ragabi get on. Of all the characters in the show, Devon seems the most normal and well adjusted, so I suspect the show have things to say about Ragabi's gung-ho approach to experimental brain surgery. Love triangles were definitely a theme in this episode, as we saw Burt having dinner with his Innie's lover and his Outie's husband. Though I hope Outie Irving isn't quite as love-struck by Burt as his Innie was, because there's something dodgy about Burt. The sinister looks he gives Irving, the fact he tried to hide being severed 8 years before the procedure officially existed, and Drummond raiding Irving's house during dinner all point to him being some form of bad guy. While it could have been a coincidence, my guess would be that the whole dinner party was a setup so Irving could be out of the house and Drummond could carry out his search. Which makes me wonder whether the subtle overture Burt made towards Irving at the end of the episode was more about keeping him sweet rather than actual feelings for him. Fields talked about Burt having a past that excluded his Outie from getting into heaven. The implication was that this meant he was repeatedly unfaithful, but it's possible that there were darker reasons, and if he's done terrible things before, he may be happy to do them again for Lumen too. It's too early to say exactly what Burt's game is, but my guess is that it's bad news for Irving. The third love triangle we saw in this episode was between Gretchen and the two versions of Dylan. I think this storyline is really heartbreaking, as Gretchen seems to be falling in love with Innie Dylan because he's not beaten down by the world in the same way that Outie Dylan is. They're essentially the same person, but one is weighed down by a lifetime of bad decisions and rejections. It'll be interesting to see what happens next with Gretchen and the Dylans. While Innie Dylan is stuck on the severed floor, there's a limit to how far their relationship can develop. But my feeling is that Gretchen would probably prefer the ambitious and driven Innie Dylan to be on the outside, rather than her lackluster husband who's a bit of a layabout. We didn't see a lot of Milchick in this episode, but it was enough to see where his head is at. On the surface, it looks like he's accepted the feedback from his performance review, and spent most of his time in this episode putting right the first two pieces of feedback he received, the paper clips and the long words. While it seemed almost psychotic to sacrifice a day of work to practice clipping paper together, I think we saw a real glimpse of somebody going through a mental breakdown and Milchick started talking to himself in the mirror. My take on this scene was that Milchick was actually talking to himself, and how he wants to put aside childish things and grow, which I think means he wants to be better at his work and focus on the company's objectives. It's worth bearing in mind that this episode saw him deal with the first two pieces of feedback, but the other area was his massive errors that he's made lately. He told Drummond that his solution to those problems was to tighten the leash on the innies. We've not seen much of that yet. In fact, taking a day off and leaving a child in charge is the opposite, particularly as it led to all sorts of misbehaving from the innies and very little macro data being refined. I have a feeling we'll see a new, tougher Milchick in the remaining episodes this season. I feel like I'm saying this every episode, but this is another excellent piece of television. The standard has been exceptionally high this season, and I just hope that they can pull together all these storylines into a satisfying conclusion by the end of the season, but still leave us something for season 3. My favourite line this episode came from Helena when she asked, "Did everyone sever their balls in the elevator this morning?" This came when Mark and Dylan weren't showing the same enthusiasm for her for taking on Lumen. While I know some fans suspect it's Helena on the severed floor still, lines like this prove to me that Helly's unquestionably back. It also draws attention to how Helena didn't do a good job of copying Helly's fiery personality when she was pretending to be her on the severed floor. One of the things we see fairly consistent in this series is how colour has its own meaning within the story. Blues and greens tend to represent the innies world, and red is often a colour we see on the outside, a bit like the blue and red pill situation in The Matrix maybe. This theme is apparent in the two intimate scenes we've seen Mark in. When he was with Helena, the background was very red, but in this episode, with Helly, everything had a bluish tinge. This helped to emphasise that Mark is with different people, even if it's the same vessel, as Mark would call it. Despite this being the 15th episode of Severance, it was the first time that Outie Mark and Outie Helena have spoken to each other. Ben Stiller and Mark Scott referred to their meeting in the restaurant as the Heat scene. This refers to the film Heat, which saw Al Pacino and Robert De Niro on screen together for the first time, after careers that had long circled each other as leading men in mobster films. Hopefully we'll see more of Helena and Mark together on the outside, as I think there's a lot more to know about Helena and her experience growing up as an Egan. A new piece of information we received about the inner workings of Lumen involved Miss Wong. When Milchick was warning her, he mentioned that he would have to deem her winter-tide material for her to pass her scholarship. This tells us that Miss Wong is part of some sort of scholarship program. I'd guess it'd be from the Myrtle Egan School for Girls, as that was the private school that Harmony Corbell attended. This gives me the impression that the employees that aren't severed are all indoctrinated into the company religion from an early age. I suspect Mr. Milchick will have been through a similar educational institution aimed at boys. It would explain why he's willing to put up with such poor treatment from the company. Things are very nicely poised for the next episode, as we've ended this one with lots of unresolved situations. Firstly, Mark's chip has been flooded and he's collapsed in the immediate aftermath of the procedure, so we'll see how this acceleration of treatment has taken hold in the next episode, providing he comes round from his fainting spell. I'm also hoping that Devon and Rugabi meeting will lead to us finding more answers about what Rugabi's up to. And there's a promise of Burt and Irving meeting up without Fields knowing about it. I've already talked about my suspicion Burt will turn out to be a villain, so it'll be interesting to see if Irving's suspicious of him too, or if love will blind him. I hope he's on his toes though, because Irving may be in danger from the things Drummond discovered when he was snooping. Ellie and Mark's relationship went to another level in this episode, but I have a feeling that things will come under strain when the reintegration process kicks in. If Outie Mark starts taking over on the severed floor, then it's likely he'll be more interested in finding Gemma than spending time with Helly. So this love triangle actually has about 5 points, with Gemma, both Marks, Helly and Helena all mixed up in a complex web of relationships. I also think we might be seeing Milchick's villain origin story this season. He's always quietly seething about one slight or another, but he's been given a hard time from all sides this season. Maybe he'll actually blow his top and we'll see a more authentic version of Seth Milchick in future episodes. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss the next one. And if you've got time, I'd love to hear your comments and theories below. Do you think Burt is up to something? How do you think Dylan and Gretchen's situation will play out? Let me know in the comments. Goodbye.